Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are conducting a forensic analysis using more than a decade of public records to trace the psychological evolution of one individual, Thomas Dall.
So let's start with a puzzle. On one side, you have Thomas Dall, a man with a documented criminal record for assault and terroristic threats. On the other side, you have Tim Dooley, a self-proclaimed deity who calls himself the potato of life. They seem like polar opposites, right? But here's the twist. They're the exact same person.
So the big question is, how does a person with that history just become someone else? Well, the key, believe it or not, is a court-ordered psychological evaluation from more than 10 years ago. It's basically the blueprint for this entire transformation. Okay, let's dive in.
Here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the two identities, then look at that 2013 psychological blueprint. From there, we'll trace the pattern of violence, the big identity switch, and how it all led to the current godhood delusion. Finally, we'll map out the entire trajectory of escalation. First things first, we have to understand that the shift from Thomas Dall to Tim Dooley wasn't some kind of spiritual awakening. No, this was a calculated, tactical move.
And this is where it gets really telling. You see, the name of Thomas Dall and his online handle, Kitty Style, were active for years. But then, in 2019, they were suddenly dropped. And when did this happen? At the exact moment his history of abuse became public knowledge. That's no coincidence. It was a strategic retreat, clearing the runway for the Tim Dooley persona to emerge with a seemingly clean slate.
All right, now we're getting to the absolute core of our analysis, the subject's own court-appointed psychiatric evaluation from 2013. And in a truly bizarre twist, he actually read this document out loud, word for word, on a live broadcast.
The evaluation found, a whole cocktail of issues, a complex mix of personality disturbances. We're talking narcissistic, paranoid, and antisocial traits, among others. But buried in that report is one specific clinical observation that is the key to unlocking everything that follows.
And here it is, grandiose compensation. So what on earth is that? Well, think of it as a psychological defense mechanism. It's when a person with incredibly low self-esteem builds this huge, powerful, inflated personality on the outside to hide how fragile they feel on the inside. This concept right here is the engine driving all his behavior. Remember that term.
Okay, so we have these clinical terms on paper. Now let's see how those traits actually translated into real-world, documented criminal behavior.
This timeline lays out a very clear pattern. In 2013, we have a documented physical assault. By 2016, that behavior escalates into terroristic threats made against a member of parliament and her baby, which, by the way, he was convicted for. So this establishes a very clear baseline of real-world violence.
And if that wasn't enough, listen to this quote from the court testimony. He justified the assault as making her surrender, and he expressed zero remorse. For him, you see, violence wasn't a failure. It wasn't a loss of control. It was a tool you use to get what you want. This complete lack of empathy is a critical piece of the puzzle.
So, flash forward to 2018. His past confessions of abuse start to catch up with him and become public. What does he do? Does he apologize, try to make amends? Nope. He pulls off a complete identity pivot.
It's really a four-step playbook. First, his confessions are exposed. Second, his online identity Kit Style becomes toxic. So third, he just declares that person dead. And finally, step 4, he relaunches as Tim Dooley to escape the past. This wasn't a rebirth. It was a rebranding, pure and simple. It's a way to pardon himself by just claiming the guilty party doesn't exist anymore.
And this entire pivot, it's a textbook example of a behavior from his clinical profile, externalizing blame. It's a refusal to accept personal responsibility. He even said that if he were to commit future crimes, it would be the fault of the people who radicalized him, just by documenting his own history.
He also uses a classic manipulation tactic known as DARVO. It's an acronym. He will deny his actions, attack his critics, and then reverse the roles of victim and offender, painting himself as the true victim of a digital assassination. All right, so all of this brings us to today, and his current persona as Tim Dooley. This is where that grandiose compensation we talked about earlier goes into absolute overdrive, reaching its most extreme yet logical conclusion.
And what's just fascinating about this is how the 2013 evaluation basically acts as a crystal ball for his behavior today. The grandiose compensation has evolved into claims of being God. The diagnosed paranoia has become these elaborate conspiracies about critics being Mossad agents. And the externalizing of blame, it's still his go-to defense.
I mean, he literally says it out loud. I am God, I am not responsible for the sins of the Son. He uses this divine dissociation to just cut all ties to the actions of Thomas Dahl. The argument is, how can you hold a God accountable for the crimes of a mere mortal? It's the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card.
So you're probably wondering, how does he explain away the mountain of hard evidence, the court records, the videos? Well, he's got a story for that too. He's created this paranoid narrative where anyone who holds him accountable is a Mossad agent. This instantly transforms his personal criminal history into a grand story of political persecution, a direct echo of the paranoid traits identified by clinicians way back in 2013.
So let's just step back for a second and look at the big picture here. When you connect all these dots, the clinical profile, the criminal record, the identity shifts, you don't see random, chaotic behavior. What you see is a clear, predictable, and frankly alarming trajectory of escalation over 13 years.
Just look at this progression. It starts with one-on-one physical violence. It escalates to criminal threats against a public figure. Then it moves into retaliatory doxing. That's maliciously publishing the private information of his critics' families, including their children. And now it has evolved into rhetoric about a mass purge and a divine reckoning against entire groups of people.
And that's the thing. Once you understand the psychological blueprint from 2013, his actions stop being shocking and they start becoming predictable. And that leaves us with one critical and very unsettling question. When a pattern of verbal, psychological, and physical escalation is this clearly documented, where does this trajectory lead next?